Alrighty, thank you guys for joining us. Next up, we have an awesome duo. Let's see here. We have Grant Hosford and Joe Shochet from codeSpark. So first, I'll give a little bit of information about them. They've graciously sent us some bios. Starting with Grant. Grant is the CEO and co-founder of codeSpark. It's a venture-backed learning game company turning programming into play. Grant is an experienced entrepreneur who has had great success at building digital businesses in Seattle and Los Angeles since about 1999. Previously, the company's included awards from winning digital agency Zaz or ZAAZ, online dating giant eHarmony, and tech incubator Idea Lab. Grant has deep expertise in new product launches. He has lived on 4 continents, which is pretty impressive, and comes from a family of educators. Grant has an MA from the Fletcher School at Tufts University and a BA from Claremont McKenna College. He lives near Pasadena with his author wife, 3 cool kids who are coders, and a goofy pug named Fletcher. And then we have Joe Shochet. He has been developing award-winning interactive experiences for about 20 years. He's co-founder and chief product officer at codeSpark, which once again is a venture-backed startup whose mission is to teach kids the ABCs of computer science using fun gameplay. He's also founder of Shochet Studios, a consulting agency that's dedicated to inventing the next generation of interactive media. Previously, he was vice president of creative at Rebel Entertainment, a division of IAC focused on social and mobile games. Their first product was Dungeon Rampage, an award-winning and highly rated online game played by over 12 million people worldwide. His career started in 1996 at Walt Disney Imagineering, R&D building virtual reality attractions for theme parks, and designing ride concepts and interactive technology. So if you go to a theme park, Joe may be a part of your experience. And after transitioning to creative director at Disney Internet Group, Joe was lead designer and developer of several virtual worlds, including the popular Toontown Online and one of the very first 3D virtual worlds for children. So that was a mouthful. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And next, Shlomi will start with the Q&A with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And thanks, Grant and Joe, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Very impressive resumes, but can you tell the audience a bit about what CodeSpark is, since I don't think everybody knows?
Yeah, absolutely. So CodeSpark is an app that, are you getting feedback? Oh, there we go. All right. CodeSpark is an app that teaches young kids about the fundamentals of computer science. We launched the company 3 years ago. So, it's produced by a startup where we make one product. And the way the product's different from some other coding apps on the market is that there's a no words interface. So anyone, anywhere in the world can play. At this point, we've had 20 million kids in 218 countries play. Wow. The other way we're different is that we turn young kids into makers. So we do have puzzles that we think are, best in class, like a lot of the other coding apps have. But playing with those puzzles teaches you concepts that you then put to work in our game maker. And so we've built game development tools that are appropriate for kids who are 5, 6, 7 years old. And so they're building thousands of games a day and sharing them with each other on the platform. So there's peer-to-peer learning that happens where if you've been on the platform for 6 months, you make this amazing game, I remix it, now I can see your code and learn how you built the game. So those are the 2 big things that make us stand out in the market, the international focus and the ability for young kids to create.
That's very cool. And can you talk a bit about what inspired you guys to start the company? Because you have eclectic backgrounds that to some extent, especially with Joe, worked in this space a little bit, but what really inspired you guys, and especially at the time that you did?
Yeah, my resume should probably just say, I had the original idea and I convinced Joe to do this with me. That's probably what it should say. So when 4 years ago, my young daughters wanted to know how computers work, and they were 6 and 4 at the time. And I went looking for something I assumed existed, which an ABCs of computer science. It just made sense to me that that would be a thing. And I was actually pretty shocked when I couldn't find anything. And the few things that I did find were for kids like, 11, 12 and up, like Scratch, and they were pretty word and kind of jargon heavy even still, and they leaned boy. You know, they weren't, at least on the surface, made to be attractive to girls. Yeah. So that's what got me thinking about this in the first place. And then the fact that when I thought about them graduating from high school in 2025 and 2026, I couldn't imagine a job that wouldn't be impacted by software, right? So it's not that I necessarily want them to be programmers, but I really do want them to be able to sit down and work with one. And I want them to look at, you know, for example, their smartphone as a tool and not just as a box that gives them information and games. So, yeah, go ahead.
I would just add to that. So I learned to program, you know, as a kid growing up in the 80s on Logo, on an Apple IIe in the back of a 6th grade classroom. But I actually thought I was using a drawing program. You know, I didn't know, no one said, hey, you're going to learn how to program. I thought it was just really fun drawing houses and flowers and faces. And it was a really good introduction to computer science for me. You know, that stuck with me. And, you know, that creative experience, I think, is the magic. And like Grant said, a lot of the other coding things out there are missing that piece. And so we definitely wanted to bring that back out. It's an old idea, but it was with the rise of the iPad and kind of touch interface, it felt like good timing to do sort of a next generation of some of those original ideas.
Yeah, and when I first did my research on what would be the best way to teach these concepts to kids, because, you know, when I started telling people I was going to teach computer science to 5-year-olds, people thought I was a little bit nutty. But right away, I actually found great research out of MIT and Tufts that said if you did 3 things, get syntax, the keyboard, and the mouse out of the way, kids could learn really sophisticated concepts. And so that's what we focused on early on. And then we just, you know, and then the big thing that I think separates us from the competition as well is we're obsessive about user testing, and we're obsessive about making sure we test with a really broad range of kids with, you know, different socioeconomic backgrounds. We test with kids who are colorblind. We test with boys and girls. You know, we get out of our bubble and we make sure that the product really works for a wide variety of kids.
Yeah, and I'd like to spend a good chunk of our time talking about that testing. But before we do, you know, you mentioned kind of being focused on or having something that appeals to girls. And, you know, I have some of your stickers, and my daughter's 3, so she's not quite ready for this, although we're starting to get her on some of these products. But even the stickers, right? They're, you know, the characters are appealing. Can you talk a bit about kind of building the first version? And the product, by the way, is the Foos, right?
Company. Well, it's now called CodeSpark Academy with the Foos. The characters are the Foos. But yeah, look, we believe in the idea of you can't see it, you can't be it, right? And so having powerful girl characters that kick ass matters. And having them not be rescued by other characters and actually be doing, you know, being front and center as the protagonist is important. And so the first character in the game is a girl. It's the policewoman. The other girl characters are ninjas and astronauts and you know, powerful people with cool powers and that sort of thing. And there's lots of great, male characters as well. You know, it's not meant to be exclusionary, right. But we lean girl, and as a result, 50% of our players are girls, which, as far as we know, is the highest percentage of any coding app. And then we also pay just as much attention to game mechanics. You know, and there's differences between boys and girls that are real, but there's just differences between kids in general. And so what we find is kids really love meaningful choice. Meaning they would love, you know, if you force them to pick between a building game, a strategy game, and a puzzle game, they will pick whatever their favorite is. But if you let them play all 3, what more naturally happens is they'll play all 3, just, you know, each one to varying degrees. And so, you know, we do a lot of weird things with kids where we force them to just go in this box or just go in that box. And we actively avoid that.
Got it. So you talked about kind of you earlier mentioned doing research and really trying to understand the research as a first step in product design. But then you mentioned testing. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit more about you mentioned the importance, but talk a bit more about the importance of testing and also
Yeah.
how you guys go about testing.
Well, so before I even met Joe, I built a paper prototype, which is a fancy name for a bad board game. And I tested it with over 150 kids and 30 teachers. And I would do 10 to 20 kids at a time. And every round I would change my board game. And so I was trying to learn 3 or 4 very specific things. You know, could I use a no words interface where everything was just icon based? And also, really importantly, would the kids play a game where they didn't have direct control over the character? Because most video games, right, you push the button and it moves. And in this case, you've got to think about what you want it to do, put the commands in, run the commands, and then watch it execute. And I was pretty concerned that would be boring. And it turned out, like, if the mission was interesting, it was fine. And so we went through a bunch of iterations on that before we ever wrote a line of code. And we really like kind of locked down the idea. And one of the things we would do so that we weren't kind of eating our own, or so we weren't living in our own bubble, is I would let kids play for 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, I would say, hey, you can have a snack, stop, or play Minecraft. Do you want to do any of that? And when they started turning me down for all 3, then I knew I was on it.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
I would just add a few things to my playtesting playbook. One that Grant already said, which is get outside your bubble. Don't only test with the CEO's kids, with the tech incubator kids. Get outside of your city. Get outside of, for us, get outside of LA because it's a kind of tech and entertainment business. The second is test very early. As a product person, this is hard. It's hard for game designers and product people to drop their ego and put the thing out there when you know it's not ready, but you absolutely have to do it. You will learn things early and save time in the long run. And the third is just listen to the, for us, it's kids. We're building a product for kids. They'll tell you what they want. Sometimes it's not what you want to hear, but we went into an elementary school of, lower income kids.
Yeah, it's 90% free lunch and 88% minority.
And we only had a few puzzle levels, and we said, hey, they seemed to like it. We said, what do you want us to build next? And it was overwhelmingly they wanted ninjas. So that weekend we went in and put ninjas in the game, and that became chapter 3 of our game. And then you say, okay, we've got that. Now what do you want? And it's this relentless listening to the audience. And we test with teachers and parents as well. You have to get the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
So early and often.
Yeah.
So can you talk though about, so now you've got over 20 million kids using this around 218 countries. When you're doing testing at that level, it's obviously very different than having 10 kids at a time playing on
just to be clear, we still do the same testing we've always done.
Okay.
We will bring in, 4 or 5 kids into the office and run them through something when it's early stage prototype. Then when it's a little further along, we'll typically go to either a bigger at-home group or a classroom. But then we also ask, we have a network now of teachers who have signed up and said, yeah, we'll give you feedback. And so it's a little bit tricky in the summer for us, but when school's in session, we say, hey, we've got a new feature, and we have some tech savvy teachers, so they'll download an early version of the game and give us feedback as well. But we never stop doing the small in-office testing. That's always like the first thing we start with.
That's great. And it holds true to that mantra of, don't write the code if you haven't actually tested it. So that's
and the other thing about testing is that a small test with 3 kids is infinitely better than no test. It's imperfect, but you will learn stuff that's important.
Probably 80% of what you're going to learn you'll get from the first 3 kids.
Yeah. Like if you have if there's a bad flow or something's too hard, one of the things we struggle with all the time because of the age group is getting the scaffolding right and not having the ramp of concepts go too quickly. It's just, kids at the age group that we work with really like to repeat things and feel comfortable before they move on to the next thing. And so more often than not, we find, we made that too steep. We need a level in between here, or we need to dial the difficulty of this back a little bit. And you learn that right away.
Yeah. That's a good point. So I have a lot more questions for you guys, but in about a minute, we're going to open it up for Q&A, and
Okay.
hopefully I have time to ask those questions during the Q&A as well. But before we transition to the Q&A, the one additional question that I wanted to ask now is, one of the things about, I mean, I had a company before that built games for kids, and one of the things when you're building games for kids is the kid is the user, but you have other people making decisions about how much to use it, whether or not to use it, whether or not to pay for it, all those types of things. How do you talked a lot about testing features with kids. How do you then build something that addresses those different stakeholder pressures?
Well, so it's really, we thought about it early on. And when, our hack at this was, we went and looked at, when we founded the company, at who was making money in the kid space. And we saw two types of companies, basically. People with billion-dollar IP, like Disney, which we couldn't compete with, and people doing subscription apps. And then talking in the education space, there were a few people who were doing well with the freemium model where, you let the teacher sign up and then you convert the district. But there's a very specific path to success there. And it seemed like the apps or the products that were doing well were not that similar to what we were building. So we ended up, following a path that seemed to fit the product we wanted to build the best. And we basically borrowed ABC Mouse's business model, which is free to schools, parents pay. The other thing is, what we liked about that business model is it was on mission for us, because it allows us to reach, the kids who need the product most for free while still keeping the lights on.
And I would say, coming from more of an entertainment, kids entertainment background, it's just really important in ed tech that the kid is entertained and engaged. The parent has to believe that there's some value, that it's important for kids to learn coding. And we're helping with that, but there's other groups like code.org and all sorts of nonprofits that are also pushing that agenda. But if the kid is not having fun and saying, Mom, Dad, please, can I subscribe? Can I keep playing? I want to play again and again. And you see them playing in the backseat at the restaurant or the airport. That's just really, really important. And you're not going to educate a kid if you haven't captured their attention first. And so if anything, we lean slightly towards, maybe 60-40 towards being a game, being entertaining, and then making sure that the content is.
You have to win the right to educate them, right?
Right.
You have to earn it, and then ultimately the kid is our customer. So even though they're not making the decision, they're influencers, and we're gonna fail in the long run if the kid isn't happy. So we spend most of our energy there. We certainly spend time thinking about how to market to parents and reach them and all that, but that is secondary, especially compared to how we think about the product.
Yeah. So we are starting to see questions come in, so we'll open it up for Q&A. I do want to point out, though, Grant, you mentioned making this available for free to the kids who need it most, and you guys are available completely for free to kids on Plan Ceibal, which is one laptop per child in Uruguay, and that's at this age group, you're talking about tens of thousands of kids who are getting to use these products for free.
Yeah, 200,000 kids in Uruguay play the game for free.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. And it's remarkable that, you talked about being on mission for a startup to already be able to have that type of impact, and to have on a country that is, 3 million people total, for 200,000 kids in that country to be using your product for free and to use it a lot. That's pretty remarkable.
It's been super cool. And it's great for us. We get amazing data about how Spanish speakers play the game, and we've added things to the game based on feedback from Plan Ceibal teachers. So it's not a one-way street. We get a lot out of it as well.
Right. Yeah. 200,000 users is a lot of useful information. So I don't know if you guys can see the questions, but let me read off this first question that came in.
Yeah.
Have you thought, and this is from Patty up at Digital Promise, have you thought about teaching low-skilled adults to code using your app, maybe the parents of kids who use it? The things you talk about you do in terms of scaffolding would very much help these adults as well.
Yeah, the answer is yes. We haven't had the bandwidth to really think about building a separate app, but to be honest, you know, parents ask us all the time, like, hey, do you have something for adults? And we're like, yes, this app. Just play the app. Like, the art is for a younger audience, but the concepts are exactly the same. And it's a great stepping stone toward then moving on to either Scratch or even a jump to like an early language like Python. You know, what we're really teaching is computational thinking. You know, the app is actively used all the way up through middle school, where kids have never been exposed to computer science before. But because we're a small team, most of our focus has been on K-5 in terms of curriculum. But yeah,
Well,
adults would be an interesting place for us to explore as we grow.
especially when it comes to teachers. So one of the problems
Yeah.
with getting computer science to the masses is that the teachers haven't necessarily learned computer science. It wasn't part of their professional training. So there's a big part of the ecosystem that needs to be built out, and we're going to try to help, which is professional development for teachers in elementary school and high school, removing the subconscious bias and making sure they have the terminology and you know,
Well, a lot
language to
yeah,
teach the
a lot of
computer
elementary school teachers are actively intimidated by the idea of computer science,
Mhm.
just because they know very little about it, and it's been sold to them as it's just for super genius geeks, which is part of the problem in society, right? So kind of overcoming that bias, making it as friendly as possible. And we are seeing some traction with teachers where like the game is so cute and non-threatening that they're like, oh, maybe I'll do it. And then they do it and they have fun, and it kind of goes from there. So I would say that's the one place we're already having an impact is with teachers.
Yeah. And I think you make this important distinction. I want to kind of emphasize it. The difference between coding, which is simply being able to use a particular language, and what you guys have been calling the ABCs of computer science, the being able to put together the logic of it and the
Right.
computational thinking and all those things, and that's actually something that people use every day.
Right.
Whether or not
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You use it every day. It has a bunch of other applications. It also has really strong correlation to important skills like reading comprehension.
Yep.
So sequencing is at the core of computer science, getting things in the right order at the right time. And by improving your skills, even in a nonverbal environment in sequencing, we see that it has a direct positive impact on reading comprehension scores. So we're trying to really deliver something that has broad impact for young kids and should help in other subjects.
Cool. A couple other questions that I have, and please, if any of the listeners, viewers have a question to ask, add it to the Q&A. But thinking about this, I mean, you've been at this for 3 years, and the two of you have actually spent careers building products for a variety of audiences. Especially over the last 3 years, what's been kind of the single most important lesson that you've gotten out of building CodeSpark?
You want to go first? Or you want me to?
Yeah, the single biggest. Maybe I can cheat and throw out a couple.
Okay.
I would say one that Grant touched on, which is scaffolding. One of the things we've learned from testing is that you need to slice up your content as thinly as possible. And I think this is true for kids and adults. I continue to be surprised at how important that is. When you're trying to teach one complicated concept, you realize there's actually 8 concepts all tied up within there, and you have to tease them apart and teach them one at a time and reinforce them. And then let kids practice with the concepts so that they really internalize them. So that's one that catches me over and over.
So mine they haven't changed that much actually from when I first started this. It's just been reinforced over and over, which is test with your actual user, your target user early and often, and then be data driven. We're kind of crazy about data. We measure everything. We have a gajillion events that we fire in the game and a very expensive mixed panel bill. But it's worth it because we get a lot of great feedback about what's working and what's not working. And I would come back to that. And actually, the beginning of that is always goals, right? It's really easy to get super excited about an idea, like, oh, we're going to teach kids to code. And it's easy to forget that you should have like, okay, our goal with this product is to do these 3 things. And then here's how we think we're going to do it. and then now let's go see if we're actually doing it or not. It's easy just to rush in and be like, we're gonna make some cool stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so setting clear goals, testing early and often, and make sure you test with your actual target users.
Yeah. And I think that's great advice for other entrepreneurs and other developers is being goal driven, because we often talk about testing, but testing is really, you're testing something. What you're testing is hypotheses about
That's right.
what works and what doesn't work. And you can't have a hypothesis if you don't have a goal in mind, right? The hypothesis is basically like, will this allow me to reach my goal? So last question, and then unfortunately we have to wrap up, but this has been great, guys. So thank you. What's next for codeSpark? Kind of what is your trajectory for the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is just growth of the core app, right? Like that's been the plan from the beginning, and we have put ourselves on a treadmill that we can never get off. We're a subscription app that updates content every 2 to 4 weeks. And our plan is just to keep getting bigger and bigger in terms of the content that's available, so that every kind of kid and every kind of learner has enough content to master these concepts. So figuring out, how to keep that product growing properly, and then also marketing channels, right? Telling people about your product so they can come use it. That's really plan A. There are some things at the periphery of that are important to us. Like we would like to start connecting the computational thinking stuff we're doing to other subjects, because we think ultimately computer science is really a tool that makes all other subjects, more interesting, or helps you solve a lot of different problems in other subjects.
The other thing is that I would encourage all ed tech entrepreneurs to be serious about is efficacy. So we've done some small studies. We've had a couple universities study our product just on their own in different parts of the world.
Yeah, in Thailand and Brazil, actually.
And then over the next year, you'll see us start to kick off some big, more formal research. If your product is not teaching the subject as well as whatever the standard is out there now, then you're not doing your job, right? You have to do better than that, or find something that no one else is teaching. So we take efficacy very seriously. We measure it constantly. We talk to teachers constantly. So that would be the other piece of advice, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you really very much. Really appreciate you taking the time on a Wednesday morning / afternoon to do this right during the lunch hour. And this is great. So very happy to hear about. Go ahead.
And well, the last thing I'll say, I'll send you a discount code for your audience. So if anyone wants to try the app on a free trial and just check it out and poke around, they can do that.
Or teachers, grab it for free.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think.
Great. Thank you, guys. And I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for having us.
All right.
Bye.